So hi again, and welcome to everybody to our November session of BusinessWise Insiders. Before we get started, just a quick overview of what you can expect this morning. First, I'll walk everyone through today's presentation, during which I'll keep you all on mute just to minimize disruptions. The presentation will last about 20 minutes, and then after that, we'll come back to our breakout room and have a discussion where you'll have a chance to introduce yourself, ask questions, and offer your own perspective on some of the ideas we'll cover today. You can also always ask questions in the chat window, and if we can't get to them during the presentation, we'll discuss them afterward. And today we're going to cover a topic that is simultaneously tried and true, and yet somehow always new, and that's the role and effectiveness of cold calling in the world of B2B prospecting. And the reason the topic is old is because the questions that we'll try to answer today, does cold calling still work, and what strategies work best today to engage prospects and create opportunities over the phone, are the same ones that sales reps have been asking themselves for decades. And in fact, we've covered the new rules of cold calling in BusinessWise Insiders in most of the past several years. And the reason it's new is that as the B2B prospecting landscape continues to shift and evolve, the strategies for how you can use cold calling on its own and in combination with other business development tools are always co-evolving, and re-examining them with a fresh set of eyes on a periodic basis always sheds new light on what's working, what isn't, and why, both in cold calling and in business development more broadly. So first, let's take a look at the current state of cold calling here at the end of 2023. There are a few stats here on the screen that I'll walk through. So 71% of sales reps say that reaching and engaging decision makers is a huge obstacle to effective cold calling. I think we all struggle with the fact that when you pick up the phone, you almost never get a human to answer it on the other end. And you can see here that that is represented by 5% of the percentage of cold calls that are actually answered by prospects. And then taking that further, when they do answer, it only leads to an appointment about 1 or 2% of the time. And now these last two stats represent averages across all B2B sales. So depending on your industry and approach, you might experience slightly different results. And here's the pessimistic take on these stats. Cold calling is really hard, and it often takes a ton of time and energy just to start a conversation with a prospect, let alone set an appointment with a promising lead. So you might ask yourself, why even bother? But there's also an optimistic way to look at these stats, because the average sales rep isn't that good. The best sales reps, using the right combination of tools, knowledge, skills, and training, can achieve much better results. But even if you take that as a given, it's safe to say that cold calling increasingly feels like an uphill battle. Our sales veterans here will remember a time when cold calling was the only and best way to get a hold of a prospect remotely. It was a time before ubiquitous caller ID, and the amount of time and energy you had to put into cold calling to set appointments was dramatically lower than it is today. Obviously, sales reps have had tools like email and social channels for some time now, but virtual channels and cadences are exponentially more complex and sophisticated today than they were just a few years ago. So it's tempting to revisit some of the same questions that perpetually nag us when it comes to cold calling. Is cold calling worth my time? Will prospects take my calls? Aren't these other channels better and easier? And then finally, does cold calling really still work? So let's start out by asking a pretty basic but really important question, and that's, is cold calling dead? Or is it still alive and well as a fundamental tool of B2B cold outreach? So let's look at a couple of quotes that I think encapsulate the arguments on both sides, as well as a few stats, and see if we can get to an answer. So here's the first quote, which is representative of the cold calling is dead position. And he says, cold calling is dead, or at least it should be. It may have worked in the days before caller ID, but today sales and marketing channels are fragmented, putting consumers in the driver's seat. And you'll see that the reasons on the right for why cold calling are allegedly dead mirror those nagging concerns we talked about just a minute ago. It's outdated, it's a time waster, and it's annoying and uncomfortable, especially in comparison with email and social selling. And then here's the counter argument, and this is from Anthony Iannarino, who's a sales consultant who writes for the sales blog, and we cite him often here at Business Wise Insiders. He says cold calling gets bashed because a whole cottage industry has popped up to sell the idea that cold calling is dead to the group of salespeople who aren't very good at it and wish for an easier way to set appointments. And his argument is basically that because cold calling is hard to do, sales reps don't know how to do it well and look for an excuse not to do it. So while there's a perennial audience for the idea that cold calling is dead, there's no real evidence that it actually is. And he cites a few reasons for why sales reps aren't very good at cold calling and therefore perceive it to be hard and not worth the effort. And you can see here at the top, there's a lot of reluctance to cold calling, which is sort of wrapped up in all the arguments we just talked about. A full 80% of sales reps struggle with the task of picking up the phone in the first place. And then the reasons that they're not very good at it is that they aren't adequately prepared to call successfully. And sales reps don't know how to differentiate themselves on a short call because they don't know how to demonstrate the value prospects receive from an appointment. But instead of searching for reasons not to cold call that aren't really valid upon closer inspection, let's look at some very good reasons to continue cold calling, and we'll come back to these throughout the course of the presentation. The first reason is that cold calling is very direct. Unlike email and social selling, cold calling is what we call synchronous prospecting. You interact with your prospect in real time on the phone, as opposed to asynchronous, where you send a message and then wait for your prospect to reply on his or her timetable and so on. The second is that cold calling is far more human than any other prospecting channel, which allows sales reps to play to one of their biggest strengths, which is your interpersonal skills. Third, cold calling builds confidence and combats fear. Successful sales, whether you like it or not, requires human interaction, often uncomfortable ones. And if you limit yourself to the comfort of asynchronous prospecting methods, you'll never build the confidence you need to offer honest advice to your prospects or clients, to tell them things that they need to hear but may not want to. And then fourth, and most importantly, just like every other prospecting technique, it's true that cold calling is destined to fail if you do it the wrong way. But if you do it the right way, it can work just as well or better than other methods, especially in certain situations, which we'll examine more closely today. And then here are just a few stats to back up that last point. 82% of B2B buyers say they have taken a meeting after a conversation that has started with a cold call. So that really gets at the heart of the notion that cold calling is alive and well as an effective prospecting tool. And then despite all the reasons we just talked about for why cold calling stinks and is no fun and isn't worth your time, a full quarter of sales reps still rate cold calling as very or extremely effective. And then finally, companies that abandon cold calling experience 42% less growth than companies that continue to use cold calling as part of their approach to new business development. So we're going to take all this as the landscape and then dive into a few rules that you can follow to use cold calling more effectively as a pillar of your business development strategy. But before I do that, I just want to invite Deborah to offer any introductory remarks on the topic.
Thanks, Sam. We all know as salespeople that our profession gets a really bad rap in general. But if we think about the 80-20 rule, let's us be the 20% that's really good and professional and successful at what we do.
All right, thanks, Deb. And with that in mind, let's get to the first rule. So hopefully I've got you believing in, or at least sympathetic to, the idea that cold calling can work if you follow the rules of the road. But what are the rules of the road? So in the next few sections, I'm going to walk you through 4 of them, but I wanted to start by clarifying the problem. All those concerns and excuses we've looked at boil down to one basic concept. Sales reps who dismiss cold calling believe it doesn't work because the results aren't worth the effort. And we can attack that problem from 2 different angles. We can reduce the effort and we can boost the results. And our first rule gets at that first point. In order to bring our effort more in line with our results, sales reps need to master the art of cold calling efficiency. And here are 3 ideas that you can use to become a more efficient cold caller. So first, start with a focused list of your best prospects. A good list is by far the most important efficiency tool when it comes to cold prospecting, and in particular, cold calling. So many sales reps define efficiency as starting with a huge list and working your way through it as quickly as possible. But it's much more efficient to start with a list of your very best prospects, your dream clients, the ones who stand to benefit most from what you offer. Because when your list is focused on your highest value clients, your dream clients, the ones who stand to benefit from what you offer, you instantly improve your chances of success. You avoid wasting time on low value prospects, and just as important, a focused list allows you to make multiple calls to those top prospects. Here's how we think about it. Would you rather call 1,000 prospects one time each, or 100 of your best prospects 10 times each? The answer becomes pretty clear and reinforces the value of having that focused list. So really think about what a tight cold call list of your 25, 50, or 100 very top prospects might look like, and use that as a starting point for your cold calling strategy. Now, of course, developing focused target markets with reliable contact data for decision makers in your local market is our bread and butter here at BusinessWise. So if you're interested in working with one of our wise guys to learn more about what a hyper-focused cold call list would look like for your company, definitely let us know. So then piggybacking off that last point about the importance of multiple touches, another great efficiency strategy is to develop and follow a cadence for your cold outreach, a clear blueprint for how and when you reach out to that list of top prospects. So maybe day one is to place a cold call, and if you don't reach them, leave a voicemail and then follow up with an email. And then day three might be another cold call and then an email with a resource you think they might find helpful that you then follow up with another cold call. But it doesn't really matter what the details are. Whatever your plan is, the point is that creating a clear blueprint reduces uncertainty and paralysis and guarantees consistency and repetition, two of the most critical ingredients to biz dev success over time. And a great way to bring even more focus to your list is to divide into groups and create sort of a rotation where you communicate with one group every week. So a specific example I read about recently suggested having a list of 60 dream clients, and then you divide it into 4 groups of 15, each of which you put into a 1-week rotation that spans 4 full weeks. So you can see there's a number of different ways you can create a blueprint, but the idea is if you map it out, you're more likely to follow it, execute, and be consistent. And of course, your cadence of cold outreach doesn't need to consist exclusively of cold calls. And we'll talk about combining prospecting channels in the next section. But it's a great idea to use cold calling early in your cadence, especially when it comes to your very top prospects. And that's true for a couple of reasons I touched on earlier. First, if you're professional and prepared, then a cold call plays to your strengths as a sales rep. You can build rapport, set yourself apart from the competition, and demonstrate your unique value. It's also your most direct path to an appointment. In contrast with email or direct messages on social channels, cold calling can deliver an instantaneous answer to your request for a meeting, in which case you don't even need to continue with the rest of your cadence, and your cold call goes from being a time waster to a time saver. Deborah, did you have anything to add here?
Go ahead, Sam.
Great, thanks. Okay, so that brings us to our next new rule of cold calling. It's one we talk about a lot at BusinessWise, and that's don't be tempted to sell your product. On a cold call, your only goal is to set an appointment. Nothing else matters. You might be asking yourself, well, isn't the point of sales to sell your product or service? Well, yes, but it's obviously not quite so simple. The process of new business development entails building as many relationships at the opening of your funnel as possible in order to maximize the number of deals you ultimately close. And that means setting first-time appointments with prospects who may never buy from you. So the question becomes, why should a prospect meet even if they may never buy? And you can see here in the graphic, if you visualize the prospecting journey as a mountain where the sale is at the top, you need to convince your prospect to get on the mountain in the first place and to stay there all the way up. And some of those reasons early on in the climb really have nothing to do with your product. They have to do with the value you provide and the reason to engage. So to answer that question, we kind of really need to get into our prospect's brain. In all likelihood, your prospect isn't even close to thinking about buying when you reach them on a cold call. They may not even want to talk to you. They may have even answered the call by mistake. So their decision-making framework in that moment is pretty simple and it's pretty small. They want to do things that benefit them, and they want to avoid things that don't. And this is a major reason why you should focus on selling the appointment rather than selling your product or service. When you try to sell your product too quickly to a new prospect, you make your own job harder than it has to be. First, you turn that small, simple decision into a big one by forcing your prospect to think about a complicated buying decision to justify taking the appointment. Second, and along the same lines, you give them a reason to say no by allowing them to say, oh, I'm happy with the way things are, or to fall back on one of the other common objections to buying a new product or service. And then finally, you immediately put yourself on a different level than your prospect because you're talking about your product or service and they're not even remotely thinking about buying. And here are the key points. Stay in the present. Don't try to close a complex B2B sale when you're at the very beginning of the process. Start small, present your prospect with the simple, safe decision of whether to set an appointment that might benefit them, and then climb the ladder. Aim for that next step and not the final step. Deb, anything to add here?
As you were talking, Sam, I kept thinking that the phrase, will you marry me, is probably not the first thing you said to your special someone. So as you said, Sam, it's really important to start with a small micro yes.
Exactly. And tying it back to cold call reluctance, if you make your goal smaller and more proximate to where you are at the beginning of the cold call, it makes the process of cold calling less daunting. If you're going into it thinking, I'm not even going to sell my product, I just want to set an appointment or even start a conversation, you might be more willing to actually pick up the phone in the first place, which is obviously critical. So let's turn to our third rule of successful cold calling, and we're actually going to take a step back from a singular focus on cold calling for a second and think about how and where cold calling fits in with all the other tools and technologies that sales reps have at their disposal. Because neither synchronous channels like cold calling nor asynchronous channels like email and direct messages exist in a vacuum. Our ultimate goal as sales reps is not to become better cold callers or better emailers. Our goal is to create more connections with prospects that turn into opportunities and leads. And by combining cold calling with email, we can increase the effectiveness of both channels. And here's a stat that really drives that point home. According to SalesLoft, response rates are 77% lower for prospecting cadences that use only email, and 91% lower for prospecting cadences that use only cold calls when compared with multi-channel cadences. So if you're only using the phone, or if you're only using email, you're getting only a fraction of the responses that you'd get with a multi-channel approach. Now, there are a lot of variables here, from how many channels you use to the length and frequency of the touches in your cadence, but it just can't be overstated how important it is to use more than one channel these days, because each channel has a clear role to play in your cold outreach cadence. And here's one really important example of that principle in action, and we've used it before here in Business Wise Insiders. Imagine you have an automated email campaign running here on the top with a target market of several thousand prospects. Maybe your list is based strictly on firmographic criteria like industry, business size, annual sales, etc. Now that you know you're reaching that list of several thousand prospects with an automated campaign, you can then use your cold outreach time, your cold call time, to focus on calling a much tighter set of your absolute best prospects. And then you can call on those prospects much more frequently in consistency, improving your odds of breaking through. Of course, as I mentioned in the last section, you can also use one-off emails as a follow-up to a voicemail or warm up a cold call by emailing a helpful resource. So there are a bunch of different ways to combine them, but you can see how if you do it in a strategic way, you can really increase the effectiveness of both channels, save yourself time, improve efficiency, and ultimately boost results. And the key points for this section are that every prospect communicates differently. In addition to all the reasons we just talked about for why sales reps should continue to cold call, it's a fact that some prospects just prefer to engage over the phone. And if you're leaving those opportunities on the table, if you give up on cold calling. Secondly, the more often you reach prospects in different ways, the better odds you have of creating a connection, right message, right prospect at the right time. is the recipe for success. And then finally, combining your channels in the right way, in the strategic way, can make each more effective, using email to amplify, reinforce, and sharpen cold calling, and vice versa. Deborah, anything from you here?
Trust is such a critical element between the seller and the prospect. And it's so difficult to develop and maintain that trust. So you want to be thinking about what will make your prospect trust you, believe you, want to continue with you at every step along the way.
Thanks, Deb. So let's wrap things up with our final rule of cold calling, and that's to write and practice your script. And the key point here is that it has to be the right script for you. I think a lot of the times sales reps are looking for the one true script that's going to unlock more appointments in sales, to get people to want to talk on the phone. And the fact of the matter that there is no one true script. It's all about being conversational, being yourself, offering value, and finding whatever words allow you to do those things. And now an overly rigid script that you're not comfortable delivering can actually hurt your cold calling by locking you into this sort of recital mode rather than conversational mode. And here on the screen is an admittedly extreme example of what not to do when it comes to cold call scripts. But as over the top as this one is, it's extremely common for sales reps to get too focused on reading scripts rather than having conversations, which is the opposite of the dynamic you're trying to create on a cold call. So what script should you use? What are the magic words that sales reps can use to engage at setting a meeting with their best prospects? Well, here at BusinessWise, we have a set of scenario-based scripts that we used, and we cover those in a different insiders session. But rather than focusing on the specific words you need to say, I think your focus should always be on the goals you want to achieve. Again, starting a conversation with a prospect where you can differentiate yourself by providing value. And there's more than one way to get there. So whatever script you use, it should be one that you can use comfortably and confidently. And the fact of the matter is, you're going to need to try out a bunch of different approaches to find the right one for you. So this slide is just a few ideas for you to try to get started on writing and finding the script that works best for you. Not all of these will work for everyone. Some of you may have strong feelings about whether these approaches even work, and that's fine. But the more ideas you consider and the more approaches you try, the more likely you are to find a script that you can deliver confidently. And you can see here the idea of being familiar. Now, this may seem like a simple intro. How have you been? But I've read several blog posts that suggest that that opener instantly increases dramatically the amount of conversations you can start on a cold call. May not work for everyone, but it's something that it might be worth trying. You can see directly under that, we have two sort of contradictory ideas. Asking for permission, which is what we recommend here at BusinessWise. Do you have 30 seconds for me to tell you why I'm calling? And after that, it's up to you if we keep chatting. Or just diving in, if your assumption is that asking for permission sort of creates too much friction, you can just enter into a conversation about why you're calling and providing value. And then here on the right, there's some ideas for questions you can ask to show value, show insight. And then of course, here on the right, being prepared for the question, what do you do? And I think some circles, the whole idea of a cold call is to set up the question, what do you do? And so having an answer to that is going to be critical to continuing the conversation. And you can see here our suggestion for the answer really steers them toward what you do with other people, offering social proof for how you help businesses like the person you're talking to on the phone, so that they can really see the value you provide and see that you have social proof, examples of ways that you've helped prospects like them to reinforce the value you're bringing to the table. And then I did not include it on the slide, but it's really critical to have a script for voicemail. Every cold caller knows from experience that the vast majority of calls go to voicemail. So there's no excuse not to have a go-to script as a central part of your outreach cadence. And then when it comes to being comfortable and confident, it's really critical to practice. I know the idea of role play is a turnoff for a lot of sales reps, but here's a quote from Jason Bay of Outbound Squad that really frames the idea of practice in a different and thought-provoking way. He says, sales amateurs practice on prospects. Sales professionals wouldn't dare waste a prospect's time in that way. And just some quick practice ideas. Practicing by yourself is really valuable. Simply repeating your scripts until you can deploy them effortlessly will go a long way toward improving your tonality. You want to aim to be positive, energetic, and real. Practice by your peers, with your peers, to improve your objection handling skills. And then aim to make practice harder than the real thing. Have your role play partner make objections vociferously and more frequently than you might expect in a real world setting. Because when your role plays are difficult, your real cold calls might seem easy in comparison. Deborah, anything on role play that you wanted to add?
As most of you know, we are big believers in role play. Doesn't mean we like it, but it does mean we do it. We have a call clinic every Friday here at BusinessWise for our own reps, and I can't encourage you enough to do the same kind of thing either within your company or with other sales colleagues.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about why role play improves your confidence on the phone, but it's also a really key element in combating cold call reluctance before you even pick up the phone. We talked about this at the beginning, that 80% of sales reps struggle with cold call reluctance. I didn't dedicate a slide to it in the presentation, but so much of what we've talked about can be used to combat that cold call reluctance, to get you dialing in the first place, whether it's modifying your goal so that you're not selling your product, you're aiming to set an appointment, or even just start a conversation. If you imagine, once you're in a conversation with a prospect, it seems easier to sell the idea of an appointment, to continue that conversation, than it does before you pick up the phone to call in the first place. So really set your expectations, modify your goals to make the task of cold calling less daunting. Again, role play, the more comfortable you are in different cold call resistance scenarios, the scary and unpleasant parts of cold calling, the more confidently you'll be able to navigate them to move toward friendly ground, and you'll be eager to take on that challenge and pick up the call and speak with a prospect. And then we talked about this a few sections ago, but modifying your routine. If what you're doing right now isn't working for you, then change it up. Try a multi-week, multi-channel cadence along the lines of what we discussed earlier, or do something as simple as changing when and where you cold call to keep it fresh. But whatever you do, stick to your new routine for a few weeks, then revisit it and see if you should keep it, scrap it, or modify it even further. Because really, this all starts with picking up the phone in the first place, convincing yourself that cold calling does work, and creating a plan, a strategy based on all of these inputs that's going to boost your end result. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open it up to our discussion. I'm going to turn it over to Deb, but thanks to everybody for attending the presentation portion. And I would really recommend that you all stick around. I'd love to hear from you, talk to you, and hear what you've got to say. So thanks again.